Hi, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about the reproductive system. And specifically, we are going to be talking about, in this lesson, the female reproductive system. And as we are going to find out in this lesson and other lessons, that the female and the male reproductive system have specialized adaptations for sexual reproduction. So, as we already know, sexual reproduction has advantages and disadvantages. So this should be a review. Sexual reproduction takes a lot of energy, and organisms often will risk their safety in order to reproduce. So those are disadvantages, but the advantage, of course, is genetic variation. Creating genetic variation is often worth it for a population. Specifically, the female reproductive system. Its main function is going to be to produce an ova. You see that term here. If I were you, I would write down that an ova is an egg. So an ova is an egg cell, and there are two different functions of the female reproductive system that you need to know. The first one is to produce the egg cells or the ova. So meiosis, which we've already learned about, is taking place in the ovaries. And then in addition to that, the reproductive system needs to provide a place for the zygote to develop. And because in mammals, organisms usually are going to develop inside of another individual, that place has to exist, and that is what the female reproductive system does. So, some review and a lecture check. How many chromosomes does an egg cell have? You should know that an egg cell has 23 chromosomes in humans, so that's a haploid number. And our other question, would each egg cell have an XX or an XY? All right, so this one was a bit of a trick question. Many of you may have put that egg cells will have an XX because females have two X chromosomes. However, you've got to remember that an egg cell is haploid, so an egg cell would actually only have one of the X's and not both. So the egg cells are produced in the ovaries. The ovaries are here. There's two of them. Females have two ovaries on each side of the lower abdomen. So the main function of the ovaries is to produce the ova, right? Ovaries, ova, or egg cells. And they also produce two important hormones that we'll get to later called estrogen and progesterone. So eggs, estrogen, and progesterone. That is what the ovaries are making. When an egg is released, so when an egg leaves an ovary, so here's our ovary. One of the two ovaries is going to release an egg about every 28 days. And when that happens, the eggs are going to be released into something called the fallopian tubes, also known as the oviduct. And the fallopian tubes contain a special kind of muscle called smooth muscle. And they also have little tiny hairs called cilia. And those very slowly move the egg cell down the oviduct or the fallopian tube. So the process of peristalsis, you should recognize that term for the digestive system, moves the eggs through the fallopian tubes. And this is going to take multiple days. It's going to happen very slowly. The egg cell is going to be moving little by little. If fertilization of an egg cell does happen, it's going to happen in the fallopian tubes. So if an egg does get fertilized, this is where it's occurring. It's occurring in the fallopian tubes. Okay, so lecture check. What is the function of the ovaries? Answer this question now. All right, so for question 1, you should have said that the ovaries function to produce ova or eggs, and a complete answer also would have included the hormones estrogen and progesterone. How does an egg move out of the ovaries? Please answer question 2 now. So an egg moves through the fallopian tubes. Peristalsis from the smooth muscles moves it along with the beating of the cilia. Okay, so we've made it through the fallopian tubes. If an egg is fertilized, it is going to embed itself in the uterus. The uterus is this structure here. The lower end of the uterus, so that is what I'm drawing the arrow pointing to, is called the cervix. So a narrow opening, the cervix is going to lead out to the vagina, that is down here. And the vagina is going to lead outside the female's body. Now there's one other thing I want to mention. It is the endometrium. The endometrium is the lining of the uterus. So it's the very inside lining. The inside, you should write that down in your notes, the inside lining. That will be important later. All right. Where does a zygote develop? That is our first question for you to answer. So you should have put that a zygote is going to develop in the uterus. That is the organ specifically for zygote development. Okay, so a few important terms to know as we discuss the anatomy. First is ovulation. Ovulation is when an egg is released from the ovary. Then there's fertilization. Fertilization is when a sperm cell joins the egg cell. You should remember that happens in the fallopian tubes. That produces a zygote. A zygote is when two haploid cells, a sperm cell and an egg cell, make a zygote. The zygote is the diploid cell there. And then, of course, pregnancy is when the embryo starts to develop in the uterus. All right, another lecture check. Put the following events in order: pregnancy, ovulation, and fertilization. So please put these in order now. So the first thing that has to happen is ovulation, the release of an egg, right? Nothing can happen if the egg is not released. Then fertilization has to occur. The sperm and the egg cell, which are both haploid, make a diploid zygote. And then the zygote is going to embed itself in the endometrium of the uterus to produce a pregnancy. All right. So with the female reproductive system, there are 4 hormones that you have to know. There are pituitary hormones. These are hormones made by the brain. Your pituitary gland is in your brain. There is FSH. This is a hormone that is going to develop the egg cells in the ovary. And then there is something called LH. This is going to cause ovulation. So both of these come from the brain. Your brain tells your ovaries to develop an egg, and then your brain tells your ovaries to release one egg. There are other hormones made by the ovaries. These are produced by your ovaries and they affect your uterus. So estrogen and progesterone, they both develop the uterus in case pregnancy is happening. All right, so those are the 4 hormones that you need to know. So, lecture check. Which hormones are made by the brain and which are made by the ovaries? Please answer these questions now. All right, so you should know that the hormones made by the brain are FSH and LH, and the hormones made by the ovaries are estrogen and progesterone. All right, and then we have the functions. So let me erase all of this. What is the function of estrogen, LH, FSH, and progesterone? Please answer these 4 parts now. All right, you should know that estrogen and progesterone, both A and D, will develop the uterus in case of pregnancy. You should know that FSH develops an egg in the ovary, and you should know that LH causes ovulation. All right, that is all we're going to cover for today. So we will continue this lecture another time. If you have any questions, please let me know.